Imagine waking up on day 1 and deciding, no more added sugar for the next 30 days. What changes in your body, your brain, your mood, and in the numbers on your lab results? The answer, surprisingly, is a lot, and faster than you probably expect. Over the next month, your body begins a stepwise recovery from repeated sugar spikes. Cravings flare and then fade. Insulin relaxes its grip. Fat becomes a usable fuel. Your brain's clarity and mood often improve. And measurable markers, fasting glucose, triglycerides, inflammation, frequently trend in the right direction. This is the 30-day reset. What happens day by day, and how to make it work safely and sustainably. Before we get into the timeline, let's be crystal clear about what we mean by sugar. That clarity matters because not all carbohydrates behave the same in the body. When I say sugar here, I mean simple sugars and added sweeteners, table sugar, sucrose, high fructose corn syrup, honey, agave, syrup, candies, sweetened beverages, pastries, and many processed foods that list sugar, dextrose, maltose, or syrups on the label. These raise blood glucose quickly and, when they contain fructose, put a special load on the liver. By contrast, starches like bread, rice, potatoes, and pasta are long chains of glucose. They still raise blood sugar, but more slowly if they come with fiber, protein, or fat. Fruit contains sugar too, but it generally comes with fiber and water that's slow absorption. It's not the same as a soda or a candy bar. For the 30-day reset, the main target is added sugars and concentrated sweeteners. If you care about improving your metabolic health, energy, or mood, subscribe for evidence-informed guidance and practical plans like the one I'll outline. Now, let's walk through what typically happens when you stop eating sugar, from the first hours to day 30. Days 1 to 3. The roller coaster and the tug-of-war. Coaster. The first 48 to 72 hours are the toughest for most people. If your usual intake includes frequent sugary snacks or sweet drinks, your body and brain expect that fast hit of reward. Sugar stimulates dopamine pathways. Dopamine is the chemical that signals reward, drives motivation, and helps form habits. Repeatedly hitting that pathway makes the brain expect frequent rewards. When they stop, you feel withdrawal-like symptoms. Expect cravings that come on strong and feel urgent. You may experience mood swings, irritability, headaches, brain fog, and a drop in energy. Physically, blood glucose will stop spiking as often, but because your body has been used to frequent bursts of glucose, you might feel low energy until your system begins to rebalance. Hunger signals can fluctuate. Some people feel ravenous at first, others oddly indifferent. These early days are largely the brain and body relearning a different set point. Metabolically, your pancreas is still releasing insulin in response to recent carbohydrate exposure, but you will likely start to see fewer dramatic spikes in blood glucose simply because you're not introducing new large doses of sugar. In the liver, fructose that would have been pushed into fat-making pathways is reduced, which begins the process of easing stress on the liver, although full recovery takes longer. Practical note for days 1 to 3. Expect the cravings and plan for them. Hydrate. Prioritize protein and fiber at meals to stabilize blood sugar, and consider short bursts of movement or a brisk walk when cravings hit. Simple strategies. Delay 10 minutes, drink a glass of water, chew gum, brush your teeth, often reduce the urge. If you take glucose-lowering medications, check with your clinician before you make major dietary changes. Never adjust medications on your own. Days 4 to 7. The pivot point. Energy stabilizes. Cravings begin to ease. Around day 4, many people notice a turning point. The initial withdrawal symptoms typically start to subside. Cravings may still show up, but their intensity often drops. Blood sugar begins to stay steadier across the day because you're not introducing sharp spikes. That steadier environment leads to fewer immediate hunger crashes and more even energy. On the molecular level, insulin levels start to fall more consistently between meals. Less circulating insulin reduces the signal for your body to store fuel and allows fat-mobilizing enzymes to become more active. Your muscles and liver begin to access stored glycogen and, gradually, stored fat. Some people begin to produce small amounts of ketones, alternative fuel molecules produced when carbohydrate availability decreases, which some brains and muscles can use efficiently. Ketone production after a sugar reset depends on overall carbohydrate intake. If you replace sugar with refined starches, ketone production will be minimal. If you replace sugar with whole foods and modestly lower carbohydrates, ketone levels may rise modestly. Mentally, many people report clearer thinking and fewer mood spikes by the end of the first week. Sleep often improves as blood sugar becomes less volatile at night. Taste begins a slow recalibration. By the end of week 1, intensely sweet foods may feel slightly less appealing. Weeks 2-4. Fat adaptation, clearer thinking, and taste recalibration. During weeks 2 through 4, deeper metabolic shifts occur. With consistent reduction of added sugars, insulin signaling relaxes further. Insulin is the hormone that tells your body to store glucose as glycogen or fat. When insulin levels fall between meals, hormone-sensitive lipase and other fat-mobilizing enzymes increase activity. That means your body is more able to tap into stored fat for energy, which often leads to gradual fat loss, especially when paired with consistent movement and resistance exercise. Taste recalibration becomes undeniable for many people. Foods you used to think were mildly sweet now taste overly sugary. This happens because the brain's reward set point shifts. Sweet receptors remain the same, but the neurological association with intense sweetness weakens. Vegetables and whole foods begin to taste more satisfying. That recalibration alone helps prevent relapse because common treats feel less compelling. Cognitively and emotionally, people frequently report improved focus, fewer mid-afternoon energy slumps, and reduced anxiety or mood lability. Part of this is the metabolic effect, more stable blood glucose, and part is neurochemical. The brain begins to rebalance dopamine signaling and relearn reward associations without frequent sugar hits. Exercise and short periods of fasting, if appropriate for you, amplify these changes. Resistance training supports muscle mass, which improves metabolic rate and glucose disposal. Moderate aerobic activity burns fuel and helps insulin sensitivity. Time-restricted eating, for example, a 12 to 14-hour overnight fast, can be an optional tool to reduce the daily window of eating and encourage fat adaptation. It is not required, and anyone with medical conditions should consult a clinician before trying more aggressive fasting windows. Brain science in the reset. Dopamine, BDNF, and neuroplasticity. Sugar's effects on the brain extend beyond immediate reward. Repeated sugar exposure blunts the brain's reward sensitivity over time. More sugar is needed to achieve the same dopamine signal. That's part of why habits form and cravings persist. When you stop sugar, dopamine signaling gradually normalizes. Cravings become less urgent, and natural rewards, movement, connection, achieving goals, begin to regain their reinforcing power. There is another important player, BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Think of BDNF as fertilizer for your brain's neurons. Raising BDNF supports the growth of new synapses, improves learning, and strengthens circuits involved in self-control and mood regulation. Chronic high sugar intake appears to suppress BDNF in animal and some human studies. Exercise and intermittent fasting are two of the most consistent ways to increase it. That's why combining sugar reduction with regular movement and, if suitable, time-restricted eating can produce a double benefit for cognition, less of the sugar-related drag on BDNF and more of the behavior-driven boost. In plain terms, this helps explain why people often report better focus, faster thinking, and stronger willpower after a few weeks off sugar. The brain literally becomes more adaptable and resilient. What you can typically measure by day 30, the lab picture and subjective wins. By the end of 30 days, many people notice both subjective improvements: better sleep, clearer thinking, steadier energy, reduced cravings, modest weight loss, and measurable changes in basic labs. Important caveat: some tests reflect longer time windows. For example, hemoglobin A1C reflects roughly the previous 3 months. So a single 30-day test may not capture the full effect, but trends can be visible. Typical lab trends you may observe after a month of cutting added sugars and improving diet and activity. Fasting glucose often falls or becomes more stable. This is the immediate measure of blood sugar when you haven't eaten overnight. Triglycerides, which are sensitive to dietary sugar and refined carbohydrates, frequently decrease. High sugar intake drives liver production of triglyceride-rich particles. Cutting sugar tends to reduce that output. HDL, the good cholesterol, ratios may improve modestly as triglycerides fall. Markers of inflammation, such as CRP, often trend lower with reduced sugar intake and improved body composition, though individual responses vary. Blood pressure may edge down, particularly in people who are insulin resistant or overweight. A1C, because it reflects a 3-month average, may not show a dramatic change in 30 days, but you can see an early shift in fasting glucose that points toward future A1C improvement. Language of evidence. These are typical or often observed trends. Individual responses vary based on starting metabolic health, genetics, medications, and adherence. People on glucose-lowering medications should consult their clinician about monitoring and possible adjustments. Never stop or change medication without professional advice. Why this matters for immune health and broader risk. Metabolic syndrome, high blood sugar, elevated triglycerides, high blood pressure, excess abdominal fat, is associated with chronic inflammation and impaired immune responses in many studies. During infectious outbreaks, people with metabolic dysfunction have been reported to have higher risk of severe outcomes. Improving metabolic health by reducing inflammatory drivers like excess sugar is one actionable way to reduce that risk, but it's important to frame this correctly. Improving metabolism may lower your risk or improve resilience, but it does not provide absolute protection against any infection. Think in terms of risk reduction and enhancement of overall resilience, not guarantees. The practical 30-day reset, rules, daily habits, and strategies that work. If you want to try the 30-day reset, here's a practical, evidence-informed plan that I use with clients and patients. It's non-prescriptive, flexible, and built around consistent principles rather than rigid rules. Core rules for the month. Eliminate or dramatically reduce added sugars and sugary beverages. No soda, no sweetened coffee drinks, no candy, pastries, or desserts that rely on added sugars. Read labels for hidden sugars under names like maltose, dextrose, syrups, and cane juice. Reduce refined starches, white bread, pastries, and highly processed breakfast cereals. Whole food sources of carbohydrates like beans, whole grains, starchy vegetables, and fruit can remain, but pay attention to portion and timing if your goal is substantial fat adaptation. Prioritize whole foods, vegetables, moderate fruit, high-quality protein at each meal, healthy fats, olive oil, nuts, avocados, and fiber-rich foods that slow glucose absorption. Avoid all liquid calories from sugar. Sweetened drinks are a fast route to excess sugar intake because liquid calories don't trigger fullness as effectively as solid food. Daily habits to support success. Protein at every meal helps blunt blood sugar spikes and preserve muscle. Eggs, fish, poultry, legumes, low-fat dairy, or plant-based proteins. Non-starchy vegetables at most meals provide fiber, micronutrients, and satiety. Move daily. Aim for a blend of short aerobic activity and resistance exercise. For example, walk 20-30 minutes most days, and include 2 to 3 resistance sessions per week focusing on major muscle groups. Resistance work helps maintain or increase muscle mass, which improves insulin sensitivity. Sleep matters. Poor sleep raises hunger hormones and fuels cravings for sweet foods. Aim for consistent, sufficient sleep as much as possible. Hydration helps blunt cravings and supports metabolic processes. Optional. Consider a modest overnight fast window. 12 to 14 hours between the end of dinner and breakfast is a gentle, generally safe starting point for many adults. More aggressive fasting windows can be useful for some people, but should be approached cautiously and with medical oversight if you have health conditions or take medications. Craving Management Toolbox. When a craving hits, try layered responses rather than surrendering or fighting alone. Delay first. Set a timer for 10 minutes and make a plan for that period. Hydrate, and have a small protein or fiber-rich snack if needed. Move. A brisk 5 to 10 minute walk often dissipates urges. Distract with a task you enjoy or a short call to a friend. Chew gum or brush your teeth. Changing oral sensation often lowers cravings. Use the if-then script. If I still want it after 15 minutes, I'll have a small piece of fruit or a plain yogurt. Over time, those urges will decline in both frequency and intensity. Shopping and cooking swaps. When grocery shopping, stick to the perimeter of the store more often. Produce, proteins, dairy, because processed foods and sugary items live in the center aisles. In recipes, reduce added sugar by at least half when possible, and experiment with spices, cinnamon, vanilla, citrus zest, that enhance perceived sweetness. Use whole fruit to add sweetness to breakfast or baking where appropriate, and pair it with protein or fat to blunt the glucose impact. Monitoring progress, what to track and when. Track both subjective and objective signals. Subjective, energy levels, mood, sleep quality, cravings, and how your clothes fit. Objective, weight and waist circumference as simple measures, blood pressure if you have a cuff at home. For labs, consider baseline testing before you start if you have metabolic risk factors or take medications. Useful tests include fasting glucose, fasting insulin, if available, triglycerides, HDL, basic lipid panel, high-sensitivity CRP for inflammation, and an A1C if you are concerned about long-term glucose control. Repeat fasting glucose and triglycerides at 30 days to see early trends. Expect to check A1C at 3 months to see a fuller change. Common pitfalls and troubleshooting. Social events are a common challenge. Have a strategy. Eat a protein-rich snack before a party so you're not arriving ravenous. Choose lower sugar options on the table, and allow yourself one small treat if that helps psychologically, but keep it mindful and intentional. Don't beat yourself up for a slip. One episode doesn't erase progress. Use the slip as data. What triggered it? What could you change next time? And return to your plan without shame. Another pitfall is replacing sugar with highly processed, low-sugar packaged foods that are calorie-dense and nutrient-poor. Focus on whole food replacements, nuts instead of cookies, Greek yogurt with berries instead of a muffin, sparkling water and citrus instead of soda. Caveats in safety. Who needs medical oversight? If you have diabetes, especially type 1 or insulin-dependent type 2, or take glucose-lowering medications, consult your clinician before making significant dietary changes. Lowering carbohydrate intake can change medication needs. These adjustments must be made under medical supervision to prevent low blood sugar. Pregnant or breastfeeding people, children, and people with certain eating disorders should also consult a clinician before starting a restrictive reset. If you feel dizzy, faint, severely weak, or notice worrying symptoms during the reset, seek medical advice promptly. Realistic expectations and measuring success. 30 days is long enough to see meaningful changes in energy, cravings, sleep, taste perception, and early lab trends. It is not necessarily a cure for chronic disease, nor does it fix decades of metabolic dysfunction in 1 month. Think of 30 days as a diagnostic and momentum-building experiment. It tells you what your body and mind can do when you reduce a major driver of metabolic stress, and it gives you data to plan the next steps. Many people use the 30-day period to adopt new habits that they then modify into sustainable long-term patterns. Stories are powerful. I've seen clients who were surprised at how quickly their afternoon brain fog lifted after cutting out sweetened beverages and added a daily walk. Others report that by the 3rd week, dessert didn't even interest them. Those subjective wins, sleeping better, having clearer mornings, fitting into a pair of jeans more comfortably, are as important as the numbers. Final practical checklist before you begin. Start with a short plan. Prepare your kitchen by removing or hiding tempting processed sweets. Stock up on whole proteins and vegetables. Plan simple meals so you're not making choices under hunger. And schedule movement into the week. Consider baseline labs if you have risk factors. Tell a friend or family member who can support you, and set one measurable goal for the month. Improved morning energy, a reduction in fasting glucose, or a consistent resistance routine 3 times a week. As Wayne Dyer observed in his work on habits and perception, small shifts in what you focus on produce big changes. For 30 days, focus on reducing added sugars and supporting your brain and body with whole foods, movement, sleep, and hydration. Expect the early days to be the hardest. Expect clarity and physiological benefits to build steadily afterward. If you decide to try this as an experiment, measure the subjective changes: energy, mood, cravings, and the objective ones: weight, waist, fasting glucose, triglycerides, and use those results to guide your next steps. Remember, the goal is not perfection, it's progress. Small daily choices compound into meaningful improvement over weeks and months. Try this 30-day reset as an experiment. Be patient in the beginning, consistent through the middle, and reflective at the end. Subscribe for more metabolic insights and health strategies. Your body, brain, and future results will show you exactly what that month was worth.